You know where to find him? Isabelle asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Price nodded, his expression tense. I have a contact who can get us close. But we'll have to be careful. Hale's people will be watching. Isabelle nodded in agreement. She had no illusions about the danger she was about to walk into. But she wasn't afraid. She had come too far to back down now. The next day, they set their plan into motion. Price's contact led them to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. It was late and the streets were quiet, but Isabelle couldn't shake the sense of being watched. The warehouse was dark and foreboding. The air smelled of rust and decay, and the only sound was the faint scurrying of rats in the corners of the building. Isabelle's heart pounded as they made their way inside, careful to stay out of sight. In the shadows they saw him. Victor Hale. He was standing by a table, speaking to a group of men, but when he saw them, his eyes narrowed, a sly smile creeping onto his face. Well, well, Hale said, his voice dripping with malice. Isn't this a surprise? You've come all this way, Isabelle. But you've made a terrible mistake. Before Isabelle could react, she heard the unmistakable sound of a gun being cocked. Isabelle finds herself cornered and outnumbered, but she refuses to give up. She faces Victor Hale in a final confrontation that will change everything. But just as she thinks she has the upper hand, a shocking betrayal sends everything into chaos. The air in the warehouse grew thick with tension as Victor Hale's men closed in on Isabelle and Detective Price. Isabelle's heart raced, but her mind was sharp. She had come too far to back down now. She wasn't leaving without the truth. Hale's smile twisted into something more sinister as he stepped forward, his eyes scanning Isabelle with a chilling sense of amusement. You really think you can come here after everything you've uncovered and just walk out with the answers you want? He sneered. Isabelle stood her ground, her voice trembling with both fear and defiance. I'm not leaving without knowing what you've done to my sister. Hale's grin widened, and he slowly shook his head. Your sister, Emma, was always too curious for her own good. She thought she could bring down people like me. But she was wrong. People like me don't get caught, Isabelle. We own this town. We own everything. A cold shiver ran down Isabelle's spine, but she refused to show any weakness. She couldn't let him intimidate her. What happened to her? She demanded. Where is she? Hale's eyes glinted with something dark. You'll never know, he said, his voice low and threatening. You'll never find her. Not alive, at least. Before Isabelle could react, the sound of footsteps echoed through the warehouse. She turned, her eyes widening as she saw a figure emerge from the shadows. It was Detective Price. But something was off. His face, usually so serious and steady, now looked tense, almost guilty. He was standing next to one of Hale's men, and his eyes avoided Isabelle's gaze. Detective! Isabelle whispered, her voice trembling. What's going on? Price hesitated, his lips tight. Then, with a heavy sigh, he spoke, his words cutting through the silence like a knife. I'm sorry, Isabelle, he said, his voice barely audible. I didn't want you to find out this way, but it's over. Hale's right. You're in way over your head. Isabelle felt the ground fall out from beneath her. The world seemed to tilt as she stared at the detective who had been her ally for so long. The man who had promised to help her find the truth. You've been working with him? Isabelle's voice was barely a whisper, as if the words themselves were too painful to say. Price looked at her, his expression hollow. I had no choice, Isabelle. When I was investigating this case years ago, they offered me a deal. I was in too deep. I thought I could find Emma, but they knew I was getting too close. They made sure I stayed quiet. If I didn't, they would have killed me. So, I became one of them. The truth hit Isabelle like a punch to the gut. The man she had trusted, the one she had relied on, had been complicit all along. He had been helping cover up the very thing he had promised to expose. You're lying! Isabelle screamed. You've been lying to me this whole time. How could you do this? I didn't have a choice. Price shouted, his voice cracking with emotion. I thought I could get you the answers you wanted without bringing you into this. But I was wrong. They're too powerful. Too dangerous. Isabelle's vision blurred with tears, but she refused to let them fall. She couldn't let this betrayal destroy her. She had come too far. "You're not going to stop me," she said, her voice full of conviction. "I'm not going to let this be the end." In one swift motion, Isabelle grabbed the gun from Price's side. The men surrounding her raised their weapons, but Isabelle didn't hesitate. She pointed the gun at Hale, her finger tight on the trigger. "Tell me where Emma is now," she demanded, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. Hale's eyes flickered with annoyance, but there was a coldness to his demeanor. "You think a gun will scare me? You think I'll tell you anything? You're wasting your time." "I'm done waiting," Isabelle said, her finger inching toward the trigger. Price's voice shook as he spoke again, his guilt evident. "Isabelle, you won't get out of here alive." But Isabelle wasn't listening. She couldn't afford to wait any longer. And then, as if the weight of everything had finally caught up with him, Price stepped forward. "I'm sorry, Isabelle," he whispered again, before reaching for his own gun and pointing it at her. Isabelle's breath caught in her throat. The betrayal was too much to bear. She didn't know whether to feel anger or heartbreak, but the truth was clear. Price had just sealed his own fate. But in that moment, something unexpected happened. Before anyone could react, the sound of multiple gunshots rang out. The men in Hale's group froze, confusion clouding their faces. Price's eyes widened in shock as he looked down at the blood blossoming across his chest. It wasn't Isabelle who fired the shots. A shadow stepped forward from behind Hale's group, gun in hand, Emma. She was standing there, alive, her face pale but determined. The same Emma who had vanished all those years ago was back, and she was holding a gun. Isabelle's heart stopped. "Emma?" she whispered, disbelief and relief mixing in her voice. "You're alive?" Emma didn't respond immediately. She simply stepped forward, her gun aimed at Hale. She motioned for Isabelle to stay back. "Get out of here, Isabelle," Emma said, her voice cold but steady. "This is my fight now." Isabelle was frozen. "But, Emma, I thought you were—" "How?" Emma's face softened for a brief moment. "I've been watching. Waiting. I couldn't let you get caught in this mess. You were too close. I knew what I had to do." Hale, stunned by the turn of events, snarled in anger. "You think you can stop me, Emma? You're nothing." But Emma didn't flinch. Her eyes never left him as she took a step closer, the gun still trained on him. "I'm not the one who's nothing," she said, her voice filled with authority. "You are." In that moment, Isabelle realized that her sister had been living a nightmare for all these years, hiding in the shadows, biding her time. She had been part of a larger plan, one that Isabelle had unknowingly walked into. The final showdown was here. Emma had returned for one thing: revenge. As Emma confronts Hale and the others who had stolen her life, Isabelle must grapple with the fallout of this shocking revelation. The battle for justice has only just begun, but will it come at a cost greater than either of them could have imagined? The warehouse was eerily quiet, save for the rapid breathing of the people caught in the unfolding chaos. Isabelle was still trying to process the fact that her sister, Emma, was standing in front of her, alive and holding a gun, her face set with the hard resolve of someone who had lived through horrors far worse than Isabelle could have imagined. For a long moment, there was only silence as the two sisters locked eyes. Isabelle's heart was racing, her mind struggling to piece together what had just happened. Emma, her sister, had been missing for years, presumed dead. And yet, here she was, standing tall, confronting the man responsible for her disappearance. "Emma, how are you alive?" Isabelle's voice was soft, almost a whisper, as she took a cautious step toward her sister. Emma didn't answer immediately. She was focused on Hale, who was still reeling from the surprise turn of events. His face twisted with fury, and he took a menacing step forward, his own gun drawn. "You're wasting your time, Emma," Hale sneered, his voice full of venom. "You think I'm just going to let you walk away? After everything you've done? After everything I've built?" Emma's eyes flickered with a mix of contempt and disgust. "You don't get to dictate anything anymore, Hale. This ends now." Isabelle's heart sank as she realized what her sister had become, someone who had been forced to fight for survival in a world that had stolen her life. Emma wasn't just the girl who had disappeared. She was now a force to be reckoned with, and she wasn't about to let anyone stand in her way. "You've ruined enough lives," Emma continued, her voice steady despite the danger. "And I'm here to make sure you never ruin another." There was a fire in Emma's eyes now, one that Isabelle recognized. It was the same determination, the same unyielding spirit that had always been a part of her, only now it had been sharpened by years of pain and suffering. Hale, realizing he was losing control, motioned for his men to close in on them. But Emma wasn't fazed. She fired a warning shot, the bullet whizzing past Hale's ear, causing him to flinch. "One step closer and I'll put a bullet in you," Emma warned, her voice icy cold. The room fell into a tense silence. Isabelle's mind was racing. She knew this was a pivotal moment. Emma had taken control, but the battle wasn't over. Hale was still a threat, and his men were closing in. "Emma," Isabelle said urgently, "we need to get out of here. You can't fight all of them alone." Emma's gaze softened as she looked at her sister. There was a flicker of something in her eyes, regret, maybe, or guilt. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by the cold determination that had driven her for so long. "I'm not running anymore," Emma replied. "This is the moment. We finish this." Before Isabelle could protest, Emma moved. She darted to the side, using the shadows to her advantage, and took out two of Hale's men with precise, calculated shots. It was over so quickly, the men crumpling to the floor without a sound. Hale was furious now. He screamed, his face red with rage. "You think you can get away with this? You think you can stop me?" But Emma wasn't listening. She was focused, her every movement swift and deliberate. She knew what needed to be done. "Isabelle, go," she commanded, her voice low but urgent. Isabelle hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do. But she knew Emma had a plan, and she trusted her sister. She had to. With a final glance at Emma, Isabelle turned and ran. She sprinted toward the exit, her heart pounding in her chest. Behind her, she could hear the sounds of the gunfight intensifying, but she didn't stop. She had to get to safety. She had to make sure the police were notified, that reinforcements were on their way. She didn't look back. She couldn't. The stakes were too high. As Isabelle ran through the dark streets, her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. Her sister, the sister she thought she had lost forever, was alive. But now, Emma was in the thick of a battle against the people who had torn their family apart. Isabelle didn't know what would happen next, but she couldn't afford to let this moment slip away. She had to make sure Emma's actions didn't go unnoticed. She had to make sure the truth about what Hale had done was exposed, once and for all. Her heart ached with every step she took, knowing that Emma was out there, fighting for both of them. When Isabelle finally reached her car, she fumbled for her phone, dialing Detective Price's number. There was no time to lose. "Price, you have to send backup." "Now," Isabelle said breathlessly when he answered. "Hale's men, Emma's inside with him. They're trying to escape. We need to shut this down before they can get away." Price's voice crackled through the line. "Isabelle, are you sure? Are you telling me you're in the middle of all this?" "Just send the damn backup, Price." Isabelle snapped, her desperation rising. "I don't care if you're scared of them. You can't let them get away with this." Price was silent for a moment, but then he spoke, his voice low and urgent. "I'm on it. You get to safety. Don't go back there. You've done enough." Isabelle hung up, her eyes scanning the dark street around her. She had done everything she could. Now, she could only wait and pray that Emma made it out alive. As the battle rages on, Isabelle faces a difficult decision, whether to trust the authorities or take matters into her own hands. The final confrontation between Emma and Hale will decide their fates, but will they make it out alive? And will the truth finally be revealed to the world? The night was suffocating. The sound of gunfire echoed through the empty streets, mixing with the distant sirens as Isabelle waited in her car, her eyes glued to the warehouse entrance. Every second felt like an eternity. She had called for backup, but it wasn't enough. She couldn't wait any longer. Her heart ached for Emma, who had been through so much, but who was also her only chance at ending this nightmare once and for all. She turned the engine over and slammed the car into gear, racing back toward the warehouse. The weight of the decision hung over her. She had made the call, but now she was going to make sure that Emma wasn't left behind. There was no turning back now. Inside the warehouse, Emma was surrounded by the remnants of Hale's men. She had already taken out 3 of them, but there were still more closing in. Hale himself was cornered at the far end of the room, his face twisted with rage. "You think you've won, Emma?" Hale hissed, his voice shaking with fury. "You've lost. You've always been weak, just like your mother. You can't stop me. You never could." Emma's grip on the gun tightened, but she didn't respond. She knew Hale's words were meant to rattle her, but they wouldn't work. She had been through too much to let him manipulate her now. "You've done enough damage, Hale," Emma said coldly, her eyes locked onto his. "You ruined my life. You ruined everything. And now it's over." Hale's eyes narrowed. He wasn't going to let Emma have the last word. With a quick movement, he lunged forward, knocking over a stack of crates as he drew a hidden weapon from his jacket, a sleek, black handgun. But Emma was faster. She fired 3 shots in rapid succession, each one landing perfectly. Hale's eyes went wide with shock as he stumbled backward, blood oozing from his chest. He fell to the ground with a heavy thud, his weapon slipping from his hand. Emma stood still, watching him for a moment, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She had done it. Hale was gone. But the weight of his death settled in her chest, an unsettling mix of relief and regret. "Is it over?" Isabelle's voice echoed from behind her, sounding small and fragile in the vast space of the warehouse. Emma turned, her heart skipping a beat as she saw her sister standing there, breathless and terrified. Isabelle had come back. Despite everything, she had come back for her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Isabelle's eyes were wide, still processing the chaotic scene around them. Emma, covered in blood and dirt, stood motionless, struggling with the aftermath of what had just happened. "I told you not to come back," Emma said softly, her voice hoarse. "I couldn't leave you," Isabelle replied, her voice thick with emotion. "I couldn't just walk away and let this end like this. Not without knowing the truth. Not without you." Emma's eyes softened, a flicker of emotion passing over her face, but it was quickly masked. She couldn't afford to feel too much right now. There was still work to be done. There were still questions to answer. Isabelle stepped forward, her voice full of quiet desperation. "You've been living in the shadows for so long, Emma. All these years, you've been fighting alone. Why didn't you come back to me? Why didn't you tell me what was happening?" Emma hesitated, her gaze falling to the ground. I couldn't put you in danger. Hale would have killed you if he knew I was alive. I had to make sure you were safe." "But you were alive all this time," Isabelle whispered, tears threatening to spill over. "I thought you were dead. I thought I'd lost you forever." Emma took a deep breath, her voice shaky but strong. "I never wanted you to think that, but I had no choice. I had to fight for my survival. And I couldn't drag you into this. You deserved better than this world." The words hung in the air, thick with years of pain, loss, and unspoken regret. Isabelle moved closer, her heart aching for the sister she had lost and found again. "You're not alone anymore, Emma," Isabelle said, her voice quiet but full of conviction. "We can make this right. Together." But before Emma could respond, the sound of sirens grew louder, growing closer with each passing second. A police cruiser sped by outside, lights flashing in the dark. Emma's eyes flicked toward the door, and for a brief moment, fear flashed across her face. "We don't have much time," Emma said, her voice urgent. "We need to go. Now." Isabelle nodded, her mind racing as she followed her sister toward the back exit of the warehouse. There was no time to waste. They had to disappear before the authorities arrived. But as they reached the door, a voice rang out from behind them. "Stop!" Isabelle spun around to find Detective Price standing in the doorway, a grim expression on his face. He was holding his gun loosely at his side, his eyes full of sorrow. "I didn't want this to happen," Price said quietly, his voice breaking. "I didn't want it to end like this." Emma's eyes hardened as she took a step toward him. "It's too late for apologies, Price. You chose your side and you have to live with it." "But Price started, but Emma cut him off. "Just leave. You're not part of this anymore." There was a long, heavy silence as the three of them stood there. Price seemed to hesitate as if weighing his options. But after a long moment he finally turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness. Emma exhaled in relief, but her face remained tense. She knew they couldn't stay there much longer. It wasn't safe. "Let's go," Emma said, her voice low but firm. She grabbed Isabelle's arm, and the two of them ran into the night, disappearing into the shadows. As the sun began to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Isabelle and Emma stood at the edge of the city, looking out at the horizon. They had made it out. They had survived. The world they had known was gone, shattered by the darkness that had defined it. But now they had a chance to rebuild, a chance to find peace. Isabelle looked at Emma, a new sense of understanding in her eyes. "What happens now?" Emma smiled, a small, bittersweet smile that carried both hope and the weight of everything they had been through. "Now we start over. Together." And as the sun rose higher in the sky, Isabelle and Emma knew they would face whatever came next, side by side. Together, they would make a new future. The case against Victor Hale was far from over. His empire had crumbled, but the damage he had caused was far-reaching. There were still people who needed to be held accountable. But for Isabelle and Emma, the fight had just begun. They weren't the same women who had walked into the warehouse that night. They had been tested in ways they never could have imagined. But now they were stronger, more determined than ever. The truth had been exposed, and while it had come at a great cost, it had set them free. And in the end, that was all they needed to move forward.